now to do that, which is this sort of alternate distribution system. Although that now is sort of changing because of Netflix and Amazon, and that window is tightening, and so that even that's changing right now.
Yeah, back in the very early days when we first started, there were probably, you could count the number of film festivals in North America on two hands, and that has really, really changed.
No, you can't even count the number of film festivals in Colorado on two hands.
Yeah.
Or Denver.
Yeah.
Yeah, did you want to add something to that?
Sure, only that I think in many cases, because of kind of a lack of distribution options or a kind of a glut of content kind of being out there, festivals are often now some of the only ways that a lot of international cinema or smaller independent films can make it to your town, especially for a regional film festival. So it's a little bit different. You know, I think a lot of times people would go out on the festival circuit to help galvanize an audience, to help promote a film, either for an upcoming release. But since those releases come in online formats or self-distribution, or even something like Vimeo on demand, where filmmakers can put their films out themselves and just charge a small rental fee, festivals often can be the only way that many really quality films can be seen on a screen. I've heard a lot of filmmakers who kind of came of age in the late 80s, early 90s, in a real big festival kind of boom time, say that they don't think if they made the exact same type of film today, they don't think that they would get that same attention or those same deals to help make their next films, because the climate of the way festivals interact with audiences and industry has changed completely.
Yeah, I mean, I think this raises another question that I wanted to get to, and this might be the time to do it. You mentioned that we were once the Denver International Film Festival, now we're the Denver Film Festival, and there have been other intervening names between. What has happened to the international component of film festivals? Is it something we should be concerned about? And maybe I'll leave it at that and see where that goes.
Well, yeah, and we had a reputation, the Denver Festival, as being an international film festival. In the very early years, we concentrated on European and Eastern European cinema. And at the time, we didn't have, even though we had some art house theaters in Denver, they weren't necessarily showcasing international films with subtitles. So that's not the reason we dropped international from the title, but that was a reality in the early years, and we still have now you can see, French and Italian and other international titles at the Landmark Theaters and at the Sea Film Center. But the festival still brings a lot of work to Denver that would never be seen here otherwise, because they're not commercially viable, even as an art house film in an art house cinema.
The World Cinema section of the Denver Film Festival is still by far the largest section of the festival.
But don't you think it's also true that the change at Sundance, and this goes, and the introduction of the American independent film and the dominance of the American independent film in art houses across the country has had some impact on festivals, not just here, but everywhere?
Yeah, but I kind of see that as coming in waves. There was this sort of 70s wave of American independent filmmakers, and there's the 90s wave of American independent filmmakers. So I think it's cyclical in a way. I don't know if it's. I don't think it necessarily changes the way that festivals program. Not here, at least.
Okay. So also to get you involved in this, you've also already mentioned all the different forms of distribution that now exist for ways that people can see films. Should festivals, what should be the festival position about films that will play on Netflix, films that will play on Hulu, films that will show on, in the alternate world of distribution that's now developed?
Well, I would say films. I'm gonna
Go, you jump in.
I'm throwing this to you, but also television. You know, it's changed enormously, especially.
Yeah.
So
I am the changing film festival,
you are
really.
That's right.
No, you know, and my background too, I mean, I used to produce the New York Film Festival, and Lincoln Center's 13 festivals a year. And, you know, I think, I mean, obviously Netflix and Amazon. I mean, this year at the New York Film Festival, all 3 of their big gala screenings were Amazon films.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think what's interesting, I mean, most Netflix films, correct me if I'm wrong, don't get theatrical. Some do, but most of them don't. So, you know, there's still something to be said about wanting to see films in a theater, properly projected, that you don't get at home. And, you know, that's where I still think it's incredibly important, you know, even if they're getting digital distribution, to showcase at festivals so you get to see it, you know, in the best form possible, you know, versus on your laptop or on your TV or, you know, whatever.
What about the idea of actually seeing it with other human beings?
Oh, that too. Yeah. Well, and, you know, one of the coolest things I think at Series Fest is that because television is something you would normally watch, you know, by yourself or, you know, at home. And one of the coolest things was all of a sudden showing TV in a room with a bunch of other people and having that conversation really changed. I think it really changed the perspective of, and networks were really shocked by that, especially as well. You know, that was my initial pitch was, you know, you never get to hit this kind of a large audience, and then let alone, you know, as part of Series Fest, we do a big screening at Red Rocks. So then that changed. We showed, both years we've done that, we've showed unscripted. Mm-hmm. So never would you see a documentary television series with 6,000, 7,000 other people. And it was, you know, and it's fun to kind of have that kind of experience, for sure.
Yeah, I would say film festivals are like the sanctuaries for cinematic communal experience. And the intimacy of a festival, as opposed to, say, Red Rocks or being alone at home, is really special. And being able to interact, especially when the film artist is there, is really special. And so I hope film theaters and film festivals are not dying because of the new platforms and the new delivery systems, and I don't think they are.
You know, you both have mentioned documentaries, and one of the things that I was thinking is that now documentaries are all over the place. You can see them on Netflix. You can see, well, and I have to go through the list of places where you can see them, and they play theatrically. Probably a small number of the documentaries made get a theatrical release. But there was a time, and I think this is one of the things that festivals, and this festival in particular, can take some pride in, helping to put documentaries on the map when it was impossible, or if not impossible, really difficult to see that kind of film. And maybe we could talk a little bit about that and then and now documentaries.
Rick, you want to?
Well, I mean, I think it's true that documentaries have sort of, rightly so, gained sort of the equal footing as narrative films. And there's some other organizations, you know, beyond here that have really helped do that. There's an organization called Cinema Eye that has really helped, I think, bring documentaries to the forefront in New York. And I think film festivals in general have sort of given documentaries equal standing. I think for a long time, people sort of looked at documentaries as the little brother, perhaps, not as important as narrative films.
Like a kept woman kind of thing.
Well, you could say that, I suppose. But I think film festivals have always treated them as just as important, and we certainly do. I mean, we have our documentary section in the Denver Festival is pretty robust, around 40 films generally.
There's also, talking about niche festivals, there are lots of documentary festivals now, and including one here in Denver called DocuWest. So, yeah, I think I agree with that.
Well, you mentioned also, Ron, you were talking about the time when, I think there was a time when festivals were also still relying on showcasing the national cinemas of Europe. There was the German New Wave, and then there was whatever was the fashion that year, and it would shift, and then it became Asian films for a while. And those, I think, were the kind of the principal achievements of festivals, that they were bringing in those great waves of film into the United States. Right now, what do all of you see as the great accomplishment of festivals at the moment, if there is one that you can cite?
At the moment, I mean, it's hard to say just because I think, you know, a real accomplishment needs time to see if there was a great impact. But I mean, I think festivals still have the ability, it is more rare than it used to be, but it does still have the ability to break out a film or a filmmaker that otherwise might not be discovered. The discovery process in festivals is still pretty strong because there's a curatorial process to it. Many people don't want to sift through thousands and thousands of the films that are being made because it is easier than ever to make a film, and that will always be true as we move forward, but it's harder than ever to find an outlet to show it. So people don't want to watch 9,000 films or 12,000 films, but if a place that has a reputation, if a place that has established a credibility is saying these 60 or these 120 films are worth looking at, then there is a smaller pool by which people will take a look and try to take a chance on those films or filmmakers. A lot of times people want somebody else to say this is good so that they can have the confidence to help back something. I would also say shorts are still, film festivals are easily the best place to help a short filmmaker make the leap forward, either to make more shorts or to make a feature or to get the contacts and collaborators that they need. Not just at major festivals where industry is paying attention and you can potentially take meetings and you know, representation and all that, but I mean more so the community aspect of festivals where you'll meet other filmmakers and other crew and other talent in the other films at the festival or in the audience that comes to your festival, and you'll find folks that you can form bonds with, and you see that influence future work. You get a support system, and that support system is huge because there is not a lot of support out there. And when, especially if you're not from a major city, you're some filmmaker from like Ohio or maybe an Eastern European country that doesn't have a lot of contacts in the US, like finding people as you travel in the festival circuit to help you is incredibly impactful to those filmmakers.
You want to talk about that a little bit now? What do you see as, if there is a major accomplishment or a couple that you think that role that festivals are playing, and this festival in particular?
Well, and for me, things get a little bit blurred because of the sheer number of film festivals that are going on at a given time. And the fall is really crowded, and so it's and there is this film festival circuit where everybody kind of bounces from one festival to another. So for me, it takes away a little bit of the excitement and uniqueness of seeing a film for the first time, or not even having heard of a film and discovering a film for the first time. But we still have Denver has an emphasis on Eastern Europe, and that's been true from the very beginning, before the wall came down and when censorship was an issue of getting these films. And we have a reputation, I think, globally for this, or at least within the film festival world. And I think it's harder for an Eastern European film to find theatrical distribution and a national audience than it is, say, for a French film or an Italian film. So I think that's a distinction that Denver still has that we created in the early going. In fact, this year we have 10 Polish films, 3 Polish directors, a screenwriter in the festival. So
I don't know that we ever answered the question, though, about the crossing of lines, and maybe you could talk about a little about this, is that if a film is going to be on Netflix, and that's where it's going, should it play, this of course came up at Cannes this year about what is legitimately should play in a festival. Should that play in a festival? Should we care about those lines, or should we just say?
Sure. I mean, why shouldn't it play in a festival? I mean, you know, if it's still a great film, and, you know, I think, again, it just goes back to, you know, Netflix gives you a lot of access to a lot of things right at your fingertips. But again, I just go back, it's still a film. It should be shown in a theater, in front of an audience, in a screen. I mean, I think, you know, I wouldn't see any reason why and look, not everybody has Netflix. A lot of people do, but it's, you know, there's still, the other issue with Netflix is that there's so much on Netflix now.
Yeah.
How can you can't figure out what to watch. And so, you know, again, I think it goes back to, Landon, it was you that said it, you know, it gives it that credibility by showcasing at a festival, and it, you know, all of a sudden people are saying, you know, this is what's to watch.
What do you think, and this is a little bit off the subject, but I'm curious to how you would respond to this, because you deal with series, and films are their own entity, and they don't go on, well, we have sequels, they do go on and on, but typically they're a 90-minute, 2-hour, and 10 minutes, whatever they are. How do you think that the popularity of series has influenced cinema itself in terms of, or has it? Do they remain separate entities? So
I kind of think it's the other way around. I think filmmaking has influenced television. I mean, I think, you know, when I took him, and I don't know if I said this, Series Fest is a television festival, much like the film festival here, but we show all series, and we do it in partnership with the Denver Film Festival in June. But I was just thinking of, I went to a meeting with HBO, and their head of development said, we make 10-hour movies. So, you know, and I actually had a really great conversation with the Duplass brothers when they did their first television series, which also happened to be on HBO. But, you know, I asked them, you know, what was the difference? What kind, you know, what did you like or what did you didn't like? What were the challenges? And, you know, for them, they were like, you know, it was the first time, they were like, the way that this story needed to be told, you know, we kind of had the 30-minute pilot where we set everything up, but then we got to live in it for, you know, 9 other hours before we brought it down to a close. And they were like, we couldn't have done that, you know, sit through a 9-hour film, and so it kind of worked for that format. But I really do, I think it's, and now more than ever, filmmakers are doing TV. So it started that way first, and you know, now it's all cross-pollinated, but yeah.
I think by and large, filmmakers just want to create, and they want to create in whatever mediums they will have the resources and ability to do so, and we're seeing television has that, have those tools and resources, whereas film is in many ways a dwindling market. It is much harder for filmmakers to get films made, and there are plenty of opportunities in television for them. So people are going to go where, people are going to tell their stories where it's attractive to do so, I think.
I'm also wondering, how much does the fact that there are, I mean, the big festivals, which now probably are Sundance, a little bit Telluride, Toronto, Cannes, of course, how much do the fact that these festivals are occurring in the fall and they have a different kind of quality than you see in a city or a regional festival, because you have a large industry participation, you have an international press contingent, that kind of thing that makes it a whole different kind of experience. How much does do these festivals set the agenda, and how much does the fact that those festivals have emerged as sort of the ones that get the most attention affect everybody else who tries to put on a festival?
I think I mean, depending on where your festival is in the calendar, I think one of those festivals sets the tone in a way. I mean, Sundance for us doesn't really do much for us programmatically. It's too far away. It's in January, we're in November. Most of the films, or the majority of the films, are either have already been released theatrically or have gone on to VOD by the time we roll around. That's not 100% true, but that's largely true. The later festivals like Cannes, we get a lot of films out of Cannes. You know, it comes out, it's in May, and then a lot of those films sort of hit Toronto or come to the U.S. in the fall. So what's in Cannes is, you know, we're looking at that a lot. And then by virtue of Toronto, which premieres a lot of films, and that's in September, we can't get our hands on a lot of those films because it's just right on our deadlines. So, I mean, we pay attention to a lot of different festivals, not just those, of course, but those are, you know, the premier festivals that are premiering films for the first times.
Go ahead.
As somebody who programs for major festivals, regional festivals, and niche festivals, I think the big key difference is audience. At a major film festival, you know you have your full houses and your audience and a certain set expectation, you know, usually with years of kind of tradition in your programming, that you can program, you don't have to program thinking about as much your audience because they're coming. At a regional festival, you do have to pay attention to what it is your audience is expecting to see and what they want to see. As a programmer, you want to sort of hit that sweet spot of finding films that you know your audience wants to see, but also finding some stuff that will challenge them, maybe open up their eyes, and you don't want to do too much one way or the other. So there's a lot, you know, there are lots and lots of films out there from many festivals and also from your submissions pool. I think, you know, you want to get films that you know people have heard about or that are exciting or that are some of the best films of the year that you'll usually have seen or debuted at other festivals. But you have people who have paid money to submit their films to your festival. You have an obligation to watch them, to discuss them, to bring them into the mix, and you want to elevate those films as well. So festivals are very important, but if a festival has a call for entries, you're primarily looking at your submissions.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about submissions over the transom. There've been a lot of press about this that I'm sure you're familiar with, called the Great Festival ripoff of people, filmmakers who pay a submission fee to have their film looked at, but the film never goes anywhere, that kind of thing. What is the Denver policy about submissions? And how many over the transom films get in the festival?
So we get about roughly 1,200, 1,300 submissions, which is not a great amount compared to, let's say, Sundance, which gets
Over 12,000 submissions.
So, we have a team of people that are a combination of volunteers and year-round programmers, and it's a pretty straightforward process. Someone watches the film. We have multiple categories: shorts. I mean, just to break it down simply, shorts, documentaries, and narratives. And someone watches the film and fills out a form that we've put together that has a 1 to 5 rating on the film. And if then it goes out to another person, and they fill out the form 1 to 5. And if it has then been rated 3 or higher by both people, then it kicks up to one of the year-round programmers. If it's got a 2 or lower, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much over for that film. And then in terms of how many films that have been paid submissions that make it into the festival, it sort of breaks down by categories, the easiest way to describe it. The most amount of things that get in are shorts. They're also the most, that's our highest category of submission. We get the most shorts submitted of any other category. The second would be documentaries. Let's say we have 40 documentaries in this year's festival, probably 25 of them were submitted and 15 we tracked down some other way. The lowest would be World Cinema, which is probably none, but we probably had 10 submitted. And then American Narratives would be the second, which there are a handful that were included, but it's also, we don't get a ton of feature-length American Narratives. It's mostly shorts, documentaries, then American Narratives, then World Cinema.
Yeah, the distinction to make is basically unsolicited submissions and curated films where programmers have gone to other festivals looking for.
Yeah, I mean, we have a whole nother set, besides the just blind submissions, then we have a whole nother box, say, where distributors, sales agents, producers send us, let's say, their new slate of films, and that's another 500 or 600 films that then just year-round programmers go through.
Right. So I want to let the audience participate here, but I also want to talk a little bit about the fact that there are, I think, in any festival, large festival in terms of the number of films, there are many streams within that large festival, but two big ones would be, for the sake of just discussion, to divide them into, say, art and commerce, and how those balance. I mean, as much as we all would like to say, oh, well, we don't really care about seeing any big-time celebrities, we want to just see great films, we all do care about that stuff to some degree.
A lot of people don't, though. I mean, a lot of our audience, I think, do not care.
So I'm asking you, what's the philosophy about balancing that? Because people want to see both.
Yeah, I mean, there are some people that's really important to them. I mean, I've always said that Denver Festival is not just, it's many festivals. And for some people, the Denver Festival to them is going to opening night, big night, and closing night, going to those 3 red carpets at the Ellie and the parties and seeing who the stars of the year might be. And that, for them, is the film festival. That's what they want to do. And that's great. If that's what they enjoy, fantastic. And if, for other people, that's absolutely, those are the things that they want to completely avoid. They want to make sure that they're seeing the films that they'll only be able to see in the film festival, that aren't going to be in theaters later, that are not likely going to be on Netflix, that are only going to be here in town during the film festival. One time with the filmmakers in person to talk, Q&A, that's their festival. And both are valid. And we try to, program it that way to make all different audiences happy.
When we were at the Tivoli, I used to say we have 2 festivals. One is on one side of Spirit Boulevard and the other one's on the other side, and I think that's still kind of true. But another nice thing about the red carpet events is that it does generate a lot more publicity, and it raises awareness for people who are maybe not aware of the film festival or never have attended the film festival to give it a shot. So they both have value.
Yeah, oftentimes, that's a very good point. Oftentimes, with a nonprofit organization, especially the big films and the big events that can help with the publicity and the sponsorship are what allows you to also be able to have, say, your experimental program or play, that gives you the ability to show smaller stuff. And that diversity in programming is just as important as your diversity in storytelling and storytellers that you want to have represented at the festival. You want to program for every conceivable type of event your audience might be interested in, because you never know what somebody will take a chance on that they suddenly discover they love. Somebody can suddenly figure out they love Polish cinema that they'd never bothered to give a chance before, or that they really love verite docs, which they always thought they hated, because they saw something incredible that got a lot of buzz while they were there to see something else earlier that day.
I just also want to say, kudos to the Denver Film Festival, too, because you guys always, you don't just show what talent is around and can come. You guys also curate those red carpets. You know, you don't just take whatever, you know, is given. And like, you know, this is a great example. You know, last year you guys had La La Land, but this year, you know, with Lady Bird and with I, Tonya, which is, you know, it just came out of Toronto. You know, I think that's impressive in what you guys do here.
How much are you, their films are curated within a world of limitation. You can't get everything that you want. What are some of the limitations for the regional festivals in terms of curating? You know, if it was an ideal world, we'd have this, you know. What are the things that limit what you can do?
Availability, first and foremost. If somebody, if a film that you really love has sold, and that distributor doesn't necessarily have a release date plan or some far in the future, they're not going to want to show the film too early, or they may have they haven't decided their strategy yet, or their strategy may not include your region. Then suddenly that's cut off to you. I think also for a regional festival, a film that is really looking to sell and hasn't sold yet doesn't want to affect its potential deal by having already played a market that may affect its salesmanship. So a lot of films may hold back until they have a distributor or another plan. So that availability is a huge kind of factor in what you can and can't get.
Well, and Ron said it earlier too, the fall is so packed with other festivals. I would imagine that has an impact with, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit easier now than it was when we were dealing with only 35 millimeter prints, especially European or Asian or whatever, when there were, you know, maybe singular or 2 or 3 35 millimeter prints vying for 10 different film festivals. Now with digital copies, it's you know, a little bit more forgiving. The only other thing that I run into occasionally that there's some people that ask for exorbitant rental fees that I won't do.
Yeah, that sets a very bad
And there's
precedent.
also the premiere factor. Some film festivals insist on their film be a premiere, a world premiere or a U.S. premiere, and if they're wanting to get into Sundance, then we don't get that film because there's a large industry presence at Sundance, and they want their film to get picked up, or they want it to get a lot of publicity. So that's another factor also.
Yeah, and then there's self-imposed limitations like a festival zone criteria for premiere status. For example, there's many large regional festivals in Los Angeles that all demand Los Angeles premieres for their films. So you might lose a film that's committed to one of the other festivals, or they might lose one to you. Yeah, it really just depends on the rules you've set for your festival and then what a film thinks is most viable to them.
So before we open it up to the audience, we'll talk a little bit about the future, which I think none of us probably are great at predicting. But as we move into the 21st century, film is in a state of flux unlike anything that I can ever recall. And it's, you know, 5 minutes from now, if you make some prediction, it's probably going to be proven wrong, or something you think you're pretty sure is going to happen will not happen. What is regardless of how the technology changes and what we're all exposed to, and you know, everything from virtual reality to who knows what else is lurking technologically. What do you see as going forward as the purpose of film festivals going forward?
Well, to me, it's the communal experience. It's seeing film the way film was supposed to be seen in a theater with other people on a big screen, and especially with film festivals, it's the opportunity to interact with the film artist and
and with each other. I mean, I also find, I mean, that audiences, you know, post-film talking amongst themselves about what they've just seen, you know, I also find that very valuable and happening a lot, you know, not more so than just your regular day at the movies where you go and see a movie and leave. You know, people hang out and talk.
As I said, festivals will always exist and thrive in their ability to connect artists to audiences. Now, how that happens is going to consistently change and still needs to change. I mean, it's also important that folks in a festival, you know, which can be its own bubble, this whole festival circuit, kind of understand that, outside of this community, there is diminishing interest in film culture. You know, younger generations are not watching the same classic and art house films that they have before. There's also, you know, a lowering of interest in theater culture, in, I think, television shows even that would have been canceled years ago. Those are now considered high ratings. So there is the way people are interacting with stories by and large is shrinking generationally and just as a culture at large. So, you know, festivals are a great bastion to help keep these artists alive and in business and working and connecting to people and making great art. But there does have to be new ways for people to engage with story. We have an inherent need to engage with story. That's not going to go away. We're always going to need it if we miss it. But like I don't think virtual reality in and of itself is the solution. But the idea of finding new ways for people to experience stories is a very good way forward, in my opinion. And so that does mean kind of new innovations, technological innovations, but also experiential ways of interacting with stories, finding ways for stories to leap off the screen and ways for you to kind of participate with them. I'm a big believer that once it gains more traction, things like immersive theater and interactive experiences, if they can be brought to the mainstream, will really entice a generation that feels a need to escape into fantastical experiences, and also, you know, I hate to say it, but sort of the growing narcissism where people want things to be about them.
Anybody else?
I mean, I think I think discovery is just still one of the most important aspects of a film festival, and for all the reasons, there is so much content out there. And I know it's for television. That was there were 720 new shows that we're airing this year, and that's an exponential growth. And so for us, what you know, when we're looking to curate, it's not just always showing the biggest shows, but finding, you know, really interesting and great shows that are gems and discovery. And I know film festivals do the same thing.
You know, everybody to some degree has mentioned the sense of community around films, and one of the things I noticed is that in this particular community, it may not be true because we can't see you because of the lights, but I noticed that the audience is getting older. A lot of the programs I've been to, let's just say there's been a lot of gray hair in those audiences. Am I wrong about this? And is the festival, is that community aging? And what's going to bring the young community, or is that notion that when Ron and I think the attitude toward film when Ron and I were younger was a lot different than it is now. And we had a different belief now, I think, then than we do in film culture now. Film culture is not the same. Can we ever get back to that? Should we not even worry about it?
I would say that's our biggest challenge, and I have no idea what the answer is. We've been trying to attract a younger audience. We've been kind of successful, but not to the extent that I think sustains an art house cinema like the Sea.
I mean, art house film, though, has always been niche, and cinephilia has always been niche, like compared to the larger population. I mean, I don't think we're ever going to get back to kind of the boom of international film kind of hitting the U.S., mostly because I feel like historically we're told that was actually very popular because that's where people could see nudity, which they couldn't see in U.S. films at the time. I mean, people weren't going for the commentary by and large. But I always think about things like they always say the Velvet Underground, 500 people bought their albums on the initial release, but those 500 people all started rock and roll bands. If you can get enough people to go to your festival or see these films who get inspired to make their own, film culture is going to continue to kind of move along. And every once in a while, some of those filmmakers will break out. You know, there will be a Moonlight. That's you can't really predict which of these films are going to do that or what's going to happen. But if folks keep at it and keep trying to make the best films and growing that community little by little, it'll always be here and great art will still exist.
And I do think, I mean, while I would agree that our audience tends to skew older, I think there's plenty of programs that we do or put on that attract exactly the opposite audience, and we just need to keep finding what those programs are and putting them on, and I think everything will be just fine.
I mean, even last night at the Real Social Club, I mean, that screening was packed, and it was a really young, great, hip audience.
Okay. Your turn. Questions. And you're going to have to probably, if you could talk as loudly as you can so we can hear you, that'd be great. In the back? Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there an optimum length for shorts that help programmers include it, whereas it might not be included if it's longer?
Sure. I mean, that's a very common question. I understand that filmmakers are always kind of looking for that kind of answer because it's a very competitive market, and you want to do everything you can to sort of present your best foot forward. The reason I always shy away from kind of giving a definitive answer is because, one, there is no definitive answer. There are exceptions to every rule. What we're looking for is a great film. Film needs to be, I will say, a film should be as short as it can be while being as long as it needs to be. It's a very vague answer, but I promise you that is the correct one in terms of like your thinking, because you should not be making a film to try to figure out what the best way for us to program it is. You want to make the film that means the most to you, that you feel is the best it can be, and when you're and chances are, if you've done that, that's going to resonate with the people who have seen it. You shouldn't be timing trying to time to say like, oh, if this film is over 16 minutes, then this will be harder to program. If 16 minutes is the best version of your film, don't try to make it 8 minutes if it then feels like it's making the film worse or missing something or skipping a beat. Now that said, most films could stand to be shorter, but that's just because there's some fat on them, or there's some things like, I always say to filmmakers, get a group of people you trust that aren't strangers or programmers that you're either trying to impress or show films to, but people who will be ruthlessly honest with you. You don't have to take all of their feedback, but if a lot of people are noticing the same problem areas, you should take a look at those areas and see if you can cut it down or change it or make your story make more sense. There's a limit to how many 30-minute or 45-minute short films will end up making it into festival programs. But that said, there's almost always a 30 to 40-minute doc that makes its way into one of the doc programs in Sundance. There's usually at least one 30-minute short that makes it in. It does mean we're picking that film instead of potentially 3 others, but it's based on the strength of the film. We thought the film was strong enough and deserved a slot in the festival.
I agree with everything Landon said, but I would say a longer short film is more difficult to program than a shorter one. That's just...
The only thing I would add to that, and I'm just talking about here, obviously, is that films under, say, 10 minutes, it opens the door for them to be programmed in front of features also.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And which means there's many more slots that they could go outside of a shorts package as well. And that number is just an arbitrary number that I've just found over the years that, actually, under 7 minutes really, it can then go in front of a feature so you have more options, but.
Yeah, but I mean, for us, at all of my festivals, it's very much, is it a short we would program anyways?
Absolutely.
And then it becomes something, then now can we put this in a program
Sure.
or put it in front of a feature? A lot of times putting it in front of a feature helps us make more space in the shorts program for actually a longer short that we couldn't put in. And also, kind of the added wrinkle that is something that's beyond your control as a filmmaker, is the short also has to thematically fit
Sure.
with the feature, and that's something you'll never, you know, you don't know what features we're considering.
Right.
So.
No, that's all true.
Anybody else? Questions? Comments? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, of course. And we try to do a lot of that stuff. We try to reach out to a lot of universities and schools. We did a screening yesterday with bussed in 150 middle schoolers and did a screening for them. We have this coming Friday, we have a whole high school day where we're bringing in high school students and screening some of their films. And a day later this week, we have a day where we're working with University of Colorado Denver, who's a sponsor, and their students are all screening films here. And so we try to do a lot of that stuff. But yes, we can do it with you as well.
And I think we could do better, and I think we will be doing better because we've just recently hired an education director, and he'll also be doing outreach to schools. So it's a good point, Roberta. So I agree with you. Good question.
I am aware that that's a gap in our program. It's not my favorite sort of film either. So it's actually something the last few years that I've been trying to figure out a bit better. Especially last year, I realized when I brought out a couple of Belgian comedy filmmakers, and it got such real great attention. In fact, I did an intro for a film, a Colombian film, right before I came here that was sold out, and it was, probably one of the few comedies in this festival, and I kind of made mention beforehand that, it's really nice to have a sold-out film on a Saturday morning, and I asked if it was, because this was the comedy, in the festival and not one of the bleak Scandinavian films that we're so good at programming. And everybody just sort of said yes and clapped. And I said, I got the message that they wanted more of that, in which the response was yes, we wanted more of that. And I actually, also made a point this year, the London program, BFI London Film Festival program actually has a section in their festival which is, it's called like the comedy. We break things up. A lot of festivals do. We have like Cine Latino, Women Plus Film, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they do that as well. And one of theirs is just called like the humor section or comedy section. And I very carefully went through that this year, looking for films that I thought we needed to be better at fulfilling that. So it's definitely on my mind. We're not there yet, for sure, but
We're
When
always...
the when the closing opening night film ended, the credits were rolling on Wednesday, my wife turned to me and said, "That didn't really seem like a festival film to me." And I said, "Oh, really? Why not?" She says, "It wasn't dark." But I think for me, I totally agree with your assessment, and Britt's too. But for me, in the early going, I think I was responding to the kind of stuff that you got in commercial films and on television that were kind of didn't really deal with life issues, and they were kind of glib and stuff like that. So I think that's where, for me, it started. But I agree that I went to see Humor Me with an audience, which is a true comedy, and everyone that I knew there commented about, that's a strange film to have in the festival, but they really enjoyed it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and to Denver's credit, having seen both the opening night and closing night films of this festival, there's a lot of humor in both of those films. But to speak back to your point, comedy's hard. We are always looking for more comedies. We're scouring everywhere that I work to find more comedies, and it's because it's very easy for comedies to be bad in the submissions pool as well. And also, good comedy is an incredible art form. It's one that's always had trouble gaining respect. You'll see, most Best Picture nominees are not some of the amazing comedies that are out there because people sort of overlook how hard it is to get that right. We see a lot of poorly made comedies, and so it's harder to pick. Also, when you have a diverse programming team, you have a number of people on there, and humor can be very specific, and so you can find films that are submitted that just don't really, not enough people find it funny for it to be effective as what it's doing. It needs to be, it's, but I will say most festival programmers, if you would speak to them, you'll find that they're always looking for more comedies. It's just harder to get right.
Also, I think, the audiences have some responsibility here too. And the responsibility is that if you come out of a film and say, "Oh, that was depressing," then there's be another question you'd probably want to ask yourself, why you might have been depressed by it. And to me, that would be, I wouldn't find that particularly interesting as a response to a film unless it was accompanied by something a little more than that. And for me, I don't know anything more depressing than most comedies that I see. In regular movies, many of them I find more depressing than realistic films that might be described as depressing. And that's the other thing, it's not just these guys. The audience has got a role to play in this. You got to be willing to sit down and watch all kinds of films. Anything else? Question? By the way, Ron had to leave, because he has to introduce a film, so he's not bored with you all.
Growing every day, I feel like. Even recently, Tribeca just launched a whole TV section. I think the role of television in film festivals is a question that's getting asked a lot around the country and around the world. I think now Sundance is doing it, South by Southwest is doing it. But they're small sections or, in their larger festival, it's not their focus. There are only a very small, I think there's three television, four ATX. There's 4 actual only television festivals. And actually, funny, sometimes we show film in our television festivals, if they're sort of about, television makers or TV and things like that. Yeah, I mean, it's popping up everywhere. But, where Series Fest is different than, in fact, all of them, is that we are a marketplace. And, our real goal, the reason we started Series Fest was to showcase independent pilots that were looking for distribution, which basically turned the entire industry on its head, because as one guy from CBS told me, that is not how TV gets made. But on the flip side of that too, they're spending $100 million plus in development in pilot season, and they'll shoot about 40 to 50 pilots and pick to air 1 or 2 of them, which just seems like an insane waste of money. So, and also now, I think the one good thing I will say about, there's a couple of good things, but what streaming platforms have allowed that I've seen for television is that independent creators can now go and make more niche content. And, what goes on ABC has to be so broad. It has to reach their broad demographic basic. Now, audiences can be targeted. And so now I think that's why we see a rise in sort of the independent content getting made in the episodic world.
I serve in a film festival board. Really excited to see this panel discussion on in Denver's lineup this year. Is it available? It would be great to show some of this to other boards or our board of directors. Is this being taped and is it available?
I think so.
Actually, it's funny. I was going to ask how many board members were here, if any. How big is the board?
We have 9 right now. We're from Breckenridge, and it's a 9-member board.
Okay.
I believe it is being taped, actually. But I can find out and let you know for sure.
Yes.
No. It just would never happen. It's not going to happen. There are those places that exist. Mostly they exist on the coast. Sundance is an anomaly and Telluride is an anomaly. If they were started today, they wouldn't become what they have become. Most of these places exist on the coast because that's where that's where the New York Times is, that's where the Los Angeles Times is, that's where all the journalists are. Even if that was our greatest desire, was to create a market and become the next Sundance, it would never happen. And we don't want to do that anyway.
Yes, go ahead.
I think more than anything, festivals have a responsibility to pick what they think are incredible films. I always hesitate with the difference between, kind of big films versus independent. I think there can be great big budget films. There can be very terrible independent films. I will say I see a lot more awful independent films than anything else. I don't think things should be supported just because they're a certain niche. I think we're just looking for greatness no matter where it lies. And how people define greatness is incredibly varied. You know, if you have a lot of different types of people from different backgrounds on a team, they're going to be pushing for different types of work. I do think diversity is incredibly important. Yeah, festivals are a great place to find emerging artists only because we're the ones looking the hardest for them. And so we do have a responsibility to find work that we can champion that very few people have seen. Sometimes that even is at major festivals. You'll see some great films play like a place like Berlin or even Sundance and sort of didn't get what many feel might have been the intention they deserved, and then they can get a greater showcase by playing the festival circuit, and people can slowly start to realize how incredible some of these films may be. But again, you're only as good as your pool, as your submissions pool. You're only as good as what's out there. I can understand your point about feeling a feeling of exclusivity at some major festivals, only because if you're an emerging artist, you're submitting, and so is a film with a lot of established movie stars, and like you're all submitting for this a similar pool. What a lot of major festivals might start to do is separate out sections. So there are certain sections that a bigger film is not competing with. So like the premieres section at Sundance, those films are not competing for a slot with submissions for the competition or the next section, for example. Those are small ways that festivals can try to help with that. But yeah, I absolutely agree. A regional festival can help. I think a great example was recently, a few years back, there was the film The Color Wheel by Alex Ross Perry, which got its start at what some might consider smaller festivals and then built a big groundswell and then played a lot of major international festivals as a result. And so it's possible. I think, you know, if the model works, then good films eventually get to their audience. It may take a while.
I also think, I mean, to that point, you know, a named filmmaker that has a little bit of experience tends to now get the bigger slots at Sundance. So, you know, taking your film to a bunch of regional festivals, and I dealt with this a lot with Kaylee as she was kind of doing her film. My partner, who has a film here, actually, just getting exposure to meet people and to network and to meet the community, because the community happens to actually be quite small, and you see the same people at all the festivals. So getting to the regional festivals and meeting all those people and starting to, you know, get talked about as a filmmaker, you know, then will help also to get, you know, maybe it's not that film, but then your next film, you know, hopefully up there.
Absolutely. Industry also does, because they're always scouring for content too, especially independent distributors, who need films to put out. They are paying attention to regional festivals.
Absolutely.
Maybe we have time for one more. Anybody? Nobody? Well, if there are no more questions, I want to thank the panel and thank you guys for being here, and enjoy the rest of the festival. And we have more panels, more conversations, so check your program and you can find plenty to participate in. And I think that one thing that's interesting that everybody seems to say is, in one way or another, is that the community that develops around the festival, even though it vanishes after the festival is over, comes together and vanishes. If you're the kind of person who likes that sort of thing, festivals still give you that opportunity of spending. You can spend 12 days here talking to people about nothing other than film, what you've seen, what you liked, what you didn't like, what moved you, what didn't move you. And as long as there's value in that, I guess there'll be festivals.
Indeed.
So thank you all.
Thank you guys very much.
And if you haven't done so already, one floor below, there are some incredible virtual reality experiences you can check out.
That's where I'm going.